distributed through the brood box, especially at this time of year. And bees will not leave the brood if it's really cold like it has been to go and fetch the nectar source, because their main priority is to keep the brood warm. So my advice would be, and my thing that I've always done since I ever started keeping bees, whether the bees need some fondant at Christmas time, just put the fondant on. It may be that the bees are on farm ground somewhere that you can't get to them, and we have a terrible east from the beast or whatever, or something terrific happens within the family or whatever, and you can't get out, you broke your leg, God forbid it, but it could happen. It's a little bit of an insurance policy, but I tend to then check them every 3 weeks. Whatever, come rain, sun or shine, or whatever the weather, as long as I can get to them. And if they've eaten that candy at fondant, I will then put another one on.
Yep.
But always heft in the hive at the same time, because you don't want the bees just to be living on the fondant that you're putting on. You want them to start using the brood stores up. So it's to find an even balance, really, because you don't want the brood chamber full to bursting with stores of food at this time of year. But then again, you don't want it empty, for the simple reason the brood nest has to have room to expand. So if you can imagine, the queen would have started laying mid to the end of January. So even though you might look at your bees, say tomorrow, and they're covering 6 frames, by this time next week, they're going to be covering 8 frames. The following week is more than likely going to be the boxes full and wanting more room. So it is very critical with this weather we're having at the moment that the bees have got food. So my advice would be, even though it is critical now, but always start about Christmas time, after Christmas, with a hefting, because different bees, different races, different strains, they will consume the feed quicker than others, and some less quickly.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Shane. Sorry, Pete.
Yeah, I'd inspect as soon as you can now. So I thought with the weather warming up, I think the bees have been held back a little bit, and the weather warms up, everything's coming out, the blackthorn's coming out, the dandelions are out, they're going to take off. So if you don't start inspecting soon, they're going to have swarming problems.
Yep. Shane.
I think it's going to end up being a swarmy spring, to be honest, because the bees, my personal bees are quite strong, and I put supers on most of them, but some are storing a little bit of fresh nectar in the supers, but they need in space more than, there's no nectar of any volume coming in, but they're needing room for the bees. So it obviously depends, but once we get a nice warm spell or a warm week, the bees are going to go crazy, because they're getting stronger every day now, rather than just sitting there like they would be at the end of April. There's lots of bees hatching every day.
Yeah.
So regarding the inspection, I've not really done any full inspections on any of mine, apart from if I think there's a slight problem with one, had a little peek in there. But the weather has been very, very changeable, as you can all agree. On Sunday, at one point it was terrific sunshine, and 10 minutes later we're in a snowstorm. So all I would advise is, if you're at home and the sun is shining and it's warm, take advantage of it.
Yeah. And as Shane said, Shane's put supers on, and I'd put supers on as soon as you can. And if you can get into the brood box and there's any frames there with stores on, I'd just scratch the stores, see if you can get them to move it up, so they need room in the brood box.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
I did manage to give my 2 hives a quick inspection on that very warm day that we had a week or so ago, and that they are okay and the queens are laying. I've been putting fondant in since January, but the last week or so I changed to syrup. that the right thing, or should it still be fondant? They haven't actually taken much of the syrup. They took some last week, but this week appear not to have done.
I think it's too cold at night for syrup at the moment. They won't take it. I'll carry on using fondant.
Okay, yeah. One of them I left fondant. There's 2 openings on the cover, and I left fondant on one and syrup on the other. But the other one had only had syrup. So, but I checked them yesterday. They're still flying. They seem okay. But maybe I'll put fondant back then. Thank you.
Yeah,
Are you sure that there is? Sorry, you sure they're not full? The box isn't full of stores.
Well, they still did have some stores. They
Yeah,
had
it
some.
may well be. Yeah,
That's what
they
I thought.
will
I thought
stop
maybe they just
taking
didn't
it
need.
if there's no room.
Yeah, I thought maybe they just didn't need it, but I wasn't really sure, so I've left it on for
It might
now.
be worth, yeah, it might be worth hefting the hive, and if that's the case, on a warmish day, crack the crown board and see how many frames they're on, and perhaps they do need a queen excluder and a super to go on.
Yeah,
It depends on the strength of the bees.
one of them's got one of them had a super all from the end of the year. I had it as a brood and a half, but when I inspected a couple of weeks ago, the queen was definitely in the brood box at the bottom, so I slipped a queen excluder in, so they've actually got a super on. The other one hasn't, but I've been doing them all today, so I'll definitely put a super on the other one then when I go up this week.
good. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, Martin, do you want to ask a question? You need to yeah.
Unmuting. Yeah, I do. I think I have a colony and a setup which sounds very similar to Claire's. I left it at the end of last year with brood with a super full of stores on top. And it's kind of 2 questions. I looked at them right at the start of April, and it doesn't look like they made it up to the stores up above. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that. And secondly, they've come through the winter really strong. And at this point, I'm really worried that that store up above is kind of in the way. And Peter, you said something about uncapping it just to encourage them to move it so that they can move the brood up there. Could you expand on that?
So you're on brood and a half.
Yeah, but all the brood is in the brood box.
And the brood box is on the bottom.
But they've got 8 frames of brood down there.
Yeah. Over winter, you should put your super at the bottom and your brood box above. It is time to move the half brood up to the top, but it's been cold. They'll probably still kind of want to stay in a cluster to a certain extent. Yeah. When I was saying about scratching the stores in the brood box, that's kind of give them room in the brood box. But if you scratch the stores, they tend to move it up to the super. Okay.
So what Peter means is you scratch the cappings off. You open them up. You open the honey up, the stores up, so the bees will use it. They'll do something with it. But okay. Martin, I'm not sure what your issue is. You've got brood in the bottom, and you've got the super is full of stores. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, but I don't want to extract that store because a lot of it would have been made from syrup.
The thing is, if you scratch it away as we normally would do, it would be honey that we're doing that with, because really you don't want them to move. If you scratch it and then put a queen excluder on and then a super to encourage them to move that up, unfortunately some of it is syrup, and that's going to end up in your honey crop. I mean, it may well, if it was myself personally, once the weather settles down, I would swap the box round so the half is at the bottom, because and then put the brood above it, put a queen excluder, and then put your honey supers, because there's going to be times through the season that they will move honey about, and that'll be the honey that they'll use first, rather than to get it out of the way, I would have thought. Or you could scratch some of it away in the hope that they will eat it and not store it. I mean, what do you think, Peter?
I was saying, if you've got in your brood box, if you've got spare empty frames at the side of the
Yes.
brood, you could always move some of the full super frames down into the brood box next to the cluster. And that'll give them immediate access to it.
Yeah.
Go on, Shane.
Or another thing you could do is take some of the full frames of food out of the super and put some new super frames in, and they will draw them, and the queen will start laying in them, and store those frames of food somewhere. Well, you could, if you've got room in your freezer, put them in the freezer to stop the wax moth or anything, or in an airtight container, and you can put them back on in the autumn, and it'll save you a little bit of feed.
Yeah.
Or give them to a weaker colony, even if you've got, if you've got several colonies, move them around.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So I like the idea where you make space in the middle of the super to let so the queen can move up.
I think it's probably the easiest one in this, but there are several ways you can do this. There's not one right way and one wrong way, but possibly, I don't know how long you've been keeping bees, but if you're relatively new to it, that's probably the easiest thing for you to do, I'd have said.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
Okay, guys.
I just say I had a similar problem, and I think it was Peter Bustin said about putting the honey from the super into the brood box, and it occurred to me to do that because it's very similar to the problem that's just been outlined, that they didn't really seem to come up and take the honey from the super that I left for them. They stayed down below. They've been okay, but I don't feel inclined to try that brood and a half thing again. It just made me feel that when I put fondant on, that it was too far away and they weren't coming up for the food. So I don't feel inclined I'd do that again. But I did think about putting the super honey down into the brood box when I inspected the other week, but I wasn't sure if that would be a problem with the gap at the bottom between the super and the bottom of the brood box. So that's not a problem if you just do it for a short while, presume, Ben?
They shouldn't be. No, I don't think so.
Okay,
it'll just give them immediate access to any stores. I think Shane's idea is kind of probably the best one. Okay. I mean, I've not got an awful lot of experience of brood and a half, and
I shan't be doing it again, I don't think.
No, yeah, definitely. If brood and a half, if the half is full of stores, and it's meant to have brood in it, take the stores out in the middle, and put some either some empty comb or some foundation in there.
Yeah,
I have brood and a half, and that's what I do.
Okay.
Right, guys, should we go on to question 2 on this list, or do you want to ask any other questions yourselves? No, okay. Because time is moving on, so, which is great. Question 2. Okay, yeah. Okay. As a new beekeeper, I'm confused by the frequent question: how many frames of brood, how many frames of stores? Why am I doing it? Whenever I look in my hives, most frames have both brood and stores, and usually some empty cells too. So I should estimate. I can't quite see under that because I can't quite see the wording. But anyway, the brood and stores in relation to the whole frame. Or does the question just mean how many frames have some brood stores? A very different answer. Anyway, this is what David and I put together. The acronym REDS comes from David, and when we're doing the practicals, this is what we're doing with you. When we're inspecting a hive, these are the things we're looking for. So here it is. I'll read it out to you. Have they enough room? Okay, so I've mentioned that before. Are there bees in all seams between the frames? This is how you judge when you need to add another box, whether it be another brood box or a super. So that's the R. Is there enough room? Have they got enough room, or do they need more? Are there eggs present? In other words, is the colony queen right? So if you can't find the queen, can you see eggs? And spotting eggs is not, it's difficult to do when you're first doing it. You know, you've got to hold that frame up into a good light. I know at my age, my eyes aren't brilliant. But even with my glasses on, you know, you've got to hold it at a light, but you get used to seeing eggs. So seeing eggs is also something you need to get used to. So that's the E. The D is the colony developing, stabilizing or shrinking according to the season, the annual cycle. Are there signs of swarm preparation? So this is the reason why David and I and Peter are keen on you ask, when we do the practicals with you, we say, well how many frames of brood have we got? So one week we might have 5, the next week we might go to 7, the next week it might go to 8. And we can clearly see that week on week, it's growing. And you can also get to learn to look at, for example, once you know that the 21-day cycle of a worker, you know, it's 3 days egg, 6-day larva, 12 days pupa, then you can look at the ratios of those if you really want to, and you can work out that yes, they are growing, because you know you've got more larva than you have, or you've got a similar amount of larvae as you have to seal brood, which means that obviously that's definitely growing. Anyway, D is for developing. The second D, is there any sign of disease in the adults or brood? Now, those of you on the beginners course, there is a whole lesson on that, so don't worry about that now, and that's something that you can understand. Now, of course, we're lucky that Shane's with us. Shane is, of course, he's our local bee inspector. Plus, he's got many years of experience and has many colonies. So we are lucky to have Shane with us today. But that's something that comes. We won't really have a great deal of time today. Maybe. Oh, we're going to talk a bit about Varroa if we've got time. But that's what the second D is for. S, have they enough stores? If there's a spell of poor weather up to the next inspection, have they got enough to last them till you inspect them next time? You know, if it rained for a week, if you inspect them once a week and it rains, have they got enough stores to last for a week? Again, that's something that you learn over time. And again, different types of bee will consume more stores. You know? Typically, the saying goes, the black bee is quite frugal, but the buckfast tends to eat quite a lot. Anyway, so this is the kind of thing that you need to be doing. Maybe not fully. You know, Shane's already says I haven't inspected fully. I don't inspect fully all the time. You know, as the season goes on, I will just look for the E part, you know, or the D part. The first D, are there queen cells? You know, so I'm just hefting it to have a look, see if there are queen cells as the season goes on. But in the practical, we go through week by week by week. This is the process we go through, and it's a good process to go through. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, or Pete, Shane, you want to add anything?
I think, Alan, this is a learned thing, and it's something that comes with experience, and it's subjective. It's very difficult to kind of exactly estimate how many stores are there, or what the ratio of eggs to larva to sealed is. It's a learned thing. It's something you pick up over time, but you'll get a good idea. And this is where the beauty of the practical sessions on the beginners course comes in. It's just unfortunate we can't do it at the moment, but that's it. It's a learned thing.
I think, yeah, what we might try and do with practice is to film it at some point so that you can watch it live, maybe. Anyway, sorry, Shane, you were going to say.
That's fine. I, the same as Chris, don't go, you know, I do a 7, it depends on the time of year, between a 7 and a 10-day rota going through my hives. At this time of year, if weather was permitting, I'd have usually been through them all. And the main focus for myself is that the hive is queen right and there's no sign of disease and it's healthy. Because I mean, if one of those things isn't right, it's not going to flow through the season at all, because you've got problems from the start. So my advice would be to anyone that you make sure the hive is queen right and it's healthy and it's got food. That's all you've got to be concerned about, and some room. And at this time of year, as we've said, the hives can change very, very quickly. And I can foresee maybe next week towards the middle to the end, it's going to get warm. And then if they have a week of warm weather and they're crammed in a brood box, you can say once they've made their mind up to swarm, depending on the race of the bee, you'll have a job to stop them.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, I mean, through the summer months, myself personally, once the swarming instinct is gone, if there is one in the hive, I will perhaps just go through 6 frames of the hive and close it up. I'm not recommending you do that. I mean, I've been keeping bees a long time and, you know, I'm quite experienced and looking at over the season, I'd be looking at thousands of hives. But I mean, yourselves with just a couple of hives, you don't get the experience and your eye in, so to speak, as in if you were looking at, I'm probably looking at more hives in a day than you'd see in 5 years type thing. But that's not to say you can't learn each time you go into the hive, because something different will be changing. And it is all experience, and you know, things will happen that you're a bit peeved off about, that there's a swarm up in the tree and you can't get to it, or it's gone into the chimney. But I mean, all I'd advise is don't stress too much about any of it really, only that the queen is healthy for you and she's there. If something happens a bit, you know, oh, I should have done this, I should have put the super on earlier, it's your learning curve for next year, so don't beat yourself up about it. It, you know, all these things over the years I've made, you know, we've all made mistakes and still do, we're all still learning. But the main thing is the queen's there, she's laying, and the hive is healthy, and they've got some food and stores. For a beginner, I would say is never really touch the first super on the hive. Always leave it on there until the end of the year, so they've got stores that they can always access, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
That's great. Yep. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Claire?
Yeah. Talking about the swarming and the fact that it might come fairly quickly this season and be a little bit out of control. I've got 2 hives and I have a spare hive. I only really want 2, but I know I need to sometimes go to 3. If I put the hive that I've got spare within the next couple of weeks in the vicinity of the other hives, is there a, you know, is that a reasonable way of thinking you might capture a swarm by going into a spare hive?
Put it on a shed roof.
Yeah.
Put it on a shed roof or somewhere about.
It's in a little beach copse, my hives now, so I can't.
Base hive for any success, as Shane says, needs to be kind of about 2.5, 3 meters, really, kind of.
Right. Okay.
Needs to be higher.
What are you doing?
Okay.
I mean, have you got a nuke box?
I've got a nuke box. Yes.
I'd use your nuke box if you can, and put some old comb in it, or
yeah, I've got that ready. So if I did that and put it as high as I can sensibly get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
it's worth a try.
yes, within reason, but don't go breaking your neck trying to put it somewhere, because I mean it will go into a hive on the floor.
Yeah.
Well, they
But
did
I
my
mean, in
original
my
one. That's how I got
experience-
started.
Okay. So, Lynn, you have a question. You need to unmute yourself, Lynn. Lynn, you've got to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay. What I would say when I was a beginner, when you were looking at about enough room or enough food, if you're thinking, oh, is there going to be enough till next time, put another super on, I would say. Or if you're not sure about the food, just give them some, you know, rather than worrying about it all week.
Yep, I think that's good advice.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yep, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, definitely. I'll sometimes put 2 supers on. You know, as you say, give them more space.
Mm.
Exactly.
Okay. Anybody? should we move on to the next? There's a part 2 to this question. Okay, so the person who asked the question was given this answer, and then they came back with this. And so the person said, okay, so much of this is down to experience. And how much is enough room? I mean, these are all the sort of questions that beginners, there's a lot to learn. And these are the sort of questions that beginners, and even if you've been keeping bees for a long time, it takes a while to get to know about it. So in this case, he says, my bees seem to prefer the upper of the 2 brood boxes. So they usually have a lot of room below, but that didn't stop them swarming several times last year. Okay, I mean, for me, the 2 things aren't related, but we'll come on to that. At least I can spot eggs now, as I was saying. You know, so this particular beginner can now see eggs, and I can just about see if the colony is growing. Not sure I'd spot any disease, unless it was obvious and probably too late. Again, this particular person's on the beginner's course, so they will learn more about that in that particular lesson. How much is enough stores? We've talked about that. Okay, so let's hope the practical sessions can begin. Well, who knows at this stage.
Okay.
And so the reply to that by David was this. By the time you've listened to our beekeeping course, I hope that perhaps many of your questions will have been answered. I'll be guiding you through certain leaflets. Hefting is an art which you develop with practice. So we're talking about hefting. Peter talked about getting particular scales. There are some beekeepers who have big weighing scales and actually put the hive on the weighing scale and weigh them. You know, and there are big commercial beekeepers I've seen talking at the National Honey Show saying that this is what they do. David says, if you were generous in feeding your bees last autumn, I doubt that they are short now. Now, Shane said, leave that first super for the bees. Yeah, so that is a very good way of making sure they've got enough, or should be enough. Though temperatures have been below average for 8 days running and are forecast to continue all week, his stronger colonies have brought in surplus nectar. Now, I have seen nectar on the ones I've inspected of mine. I've not inspected all of them, but they did bring in, with that warm weather, they brought in actually quite a bit. And when I'm hefting, my colonies, my hives are actually quite a bit heavier than they were. So he's put there a number of things coming through. And even dandelion I've got lots of dandelion appearing, and the bees were all over it this morning. The dandelion's great, you know. And there's an old saying that, you know, once the dandelion comes, then the bees aren't going to starve or shouldn't starve. I mean, even though it's self-pollinating, it secretes nectar and gives off pollen, and the bees, and it does it early in the morning. I mean, it was 8 degrees here with the sun shining, admittedly, but my bees were were all over the dandelions early this morning. Giving plenty of room in the brood nest isn't enough to prevent swarming. If they want to swarm, as Shane said, if they want to swarm, they'll swarm. So he's emphasising again that there are 4 more lessons to go through. So he's saying that you should pick that up. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to make a comment about those 2 bits. Maybe Shane or Peter. But I think we probably covered most of that, don't you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so question 3. This was another one. 2 of my colonies survived and 1 just dwindled away to nothing and died in a tiny cluster. Why does that happen? Now, I wrote down just a few things here that might have happened in my opinion. Yeah, so a few things here I've said, look, because I had one that dwindled away to nothing. And I've got a feeling that particular one might have had quite a lot of varroa as it went in. Anyway, so possibly that the colony didn't create enough winter bees in the late summer, autumn of last year. Not enough stores, particularly if you find bees with head down in cells and it's died out. They're looking for food if they're doing that. Colony was small going into winter and can't keep warm and it perishes. Now I do keep small colonies, and most of my small colonies have come through, I'm pleased to say. But I keep them in polynukes. So I would say definitely don't keep a small colony in a full wooden box. If you've got a small colony and you want to try and bring it through without combining it with another one, because the other thing to do is people say combine it with another one. But what I do is I'll put it into a polynuke, keep it, and it's warmer there in a smaller space. They may be diseased, heavily infested with varroa. If you've got a heavily infested colony going into winter, I'll be very surprised if it comes through. It will dwindle down to nothing and die out, in my opinion. I've seen it, because I've tried doing that kind of thing. And the queen may have died for some reason. And so there's been no brood rearing throughout the winter period, and gradually the colonies dwindled. So I don't know if anybody's got any comments or questions about why do colonies dwindle down to nothing and die, other than those things.
Um,
I think we've seen kind of quite a lot of poorly mated late queens. If you've had a swarm late in the season and the new queen hasn't mated properly, then that relates to kind of the not enough winter bees are being produced.
Yep. Yeah. Poorly mated queens. That's it.
yeah, and carrying on from what Peter was saying, you know, last summer wasn't great. June was very wet. July wasn't the best. So colonies, if they'd swarmed, the queens hadn't got out they may have got out once successfully on a mating flight, but many times, very often they go a few times on a mating flight, and possibly what we've been seeing as bee inspectors recently is there's a lot of drone layers about, and a lot of beekeepers are getting in contact with us that the queens have failed. Mentioning no names, I had a call to somebody who's a bee farmer actually over the border, and they've lost nearly half their stocks due to ill-mated queens and didn't treat for varroa. And they were fine end of January, and went to check them middle of March. They were getting smaller, and now he went to see them, and they're dead, all of them. So, you know, he's from 2 sites, he's lost 50 hives, and really it's just down to ill-mated queens, drone layers. You can see that she'd been laying drones, and she had started laying, and no varroa treatment, unfortunately. So very sad for him to lose 50 of his 100 stocks.
Shane, why didn't he treat for varroa?
But we
Sorry?
said he ran out. So you
So
tell me.
Okay. But it's interesting that many more beekeepers are not treating, and that's the final question really that I got today on the list. But that's interesting that he's lost 50 colonies out of 100.
Okay,
Yep. Sorry.
I'll come back to that one in a moment.
All right.
But just going back to regarding a small colony going through the winter, I think it was Chris or Peter said that if the colony is small, put it in a polystyrene nuke, it's a lot warmer. And in my experience, just because they're small doesn't mean they won't come through the winter. They may take a little bit longer to pick up in the spring, but in my experience, they are the ones that outperform or catch up any of the strong colonies, because all they seem to want to do is in the spring is hit the ground running, where perhaps some of the stronger colonies are thinking, oh, we might split and take half the hive from here, for an example, or, you know, there's a lot more bees to feed. So if we have a cold spell like now, they're eating a lot of honey that they perhaps produce later in the year or so. So really, in my experience, a small colony is, yes, it is a little bit of a worry, but I tend to, even if I've got a small, a nuke, perhaps a 6 or 7 frame hive going into the winter, I tend to put a piece of carpet or a piece of quilt on the top of them, just for a little bit of more insulation. I mean, I know you can get insulated sort of king span. I tend to not use that because I want it to breathe. And I have found that a lot of condensation on the inside of the roofs. It's not the cold that will kill the bees, it's the wet. If the wet gets into the hive, that's what will kill them, the dampness.
Yep.
If you don't have a nuke box, you can always use dummy boards and put them either side of the cluster and insulate kind of.
Yeah, anything to reflect the heat back in.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with both. Thanks. Sorry, Shane.
And regarding the varroa, I don't know whether any of you are aware, but as of the 21st of April, the need to report varroa is becoming, well, it isn't compulsory, but we have, us as the bee unit, this is with the bee inspector's hat on now, all beekeepers on bee base will be marked that their colonies have got varroa, and it's all to do with us as a third well, as we're no longer in the EU, as you're all aware, so we can't still carry on with the rules. So if we want to export to the EU honeybees, very few of them get exported, but we have to meet their criteria, and the criteria is, unfortunately, the whole country has to be classed as having Varroa. On the 21st of April, all of us beekeepers that are registered on BBase, there'll be a tick box, yes or no. Well, it's automatically being ticked yes for everybody. But if you're really 100% sure you don't have Varroa in your bees, and parts of the UK don't, I think it's the Isle of Man, they've not got Varroa. They obviously can go in and untick theirs that they don't have Varroa. But we as bee inspectors will be carrying out more of a, keeping more of a record on Varroa, which we perhaps haven't in the past few years. Are there any questions on that?
I wonder how many French
because we're classed as a third country now.
I wonder how many French and Spanish beekeepers are notifying kind of the Varroa in their hives.
Mm. Well, they wouldn't be told what to do, aren't they?
No. Okay. Actually, you just reminded me. On the website. There's also a survey that's being done that also needs to be completed by the 21st. Have a quick look at it. It's about. It's to do with various things to do with beekeeping. So I mean, it's. I don't know if that's the same as you, Shane. Is it? Is it the bee unit?
The healthy bees plan, isn't it?
Which is it?
Sorry.
It's to do with the healthy bees plan.
Yeah, it's not what I've been talking about, but it is to do with healthy bee plan. Yes.
Okay. So have a quick look and do the survey if you can. I've done it.
Was there another question?
There is one more question.
Is there another question?
There is, yeah. Shall I go on to it? Oops, hang on. Yeah, what's happened to my PowerPoint? Oh, there it is. So this one's about chemically treating. We've talked about it a little bit, really. So this particular person said, look, I've kept bees for many years. I don't chemically treat for Varroa, but use a bee gym. So Shane, I'd be interested in what you thought about the bee gym. Unusually, I've lost one of my 3 overwintered hives, but not yet investigated. I'd be interested in others' experiences of allowing natural selection. I would also add that I live in a rural area with no other apiary nearby, and various things there. So these are just my comments here. I think we probably covered a lot of it. So, I mean, in my opinion, I would say it's important to check for Varroa and treat if they need it. It's covered in the course for the beginners, so you will get to see more about that. I use something called Varroa Med from Thorns if I need it, and I just put it over the seams of bees. A colony of bees heavily infested with Varroa going into winter is most likely to dwindle and die out. We've already talked about that. Those who treat for Varroa, a lot of people who treat for Varroa say that those who don't treat, then basically their infested drones with Varroa will come into their hives, and they call them bombs. But in my opinion, if you've got a colony that's got bad Varroa, then the drones actually are the worst hit, because the 24-day cycle of the drone is is perfect for the Varroa. Anyway, because drones are welcomed into any hive, basically. And also, this year I've been looking at Varroa-sensitive hygienic queens that you can buy. But how effective they are, we have to wait and see. Anyway, so I don't know, again, Shane or Peter or anybody else, if you've got any comments on treating or not for Varroa. But as you said, Shane, you're going to be checking for Varroa, which is great.
Yeah. Well, we've always checked for Varroa, but it's just been recorded, but now it's becoming mandatory that we have to record it. More and more people seem to not be treating for Varroa. And in the north of the county, and specifically in parts of North Wales, it's become the new modern sort of trend not to treat. But unfortunately, the inspector up there and myself, we seem to be, this spring, had a lot of beekeepers get in touch with us that they've lost all of their hives.
Wow.
And inspector up North Wales and myself have been out to look at what's the remains that are left of the hive, and it's all varroa damage. You can probably get away with not treating for varroa, depending on your area, how long. When I say area, it's if there are, you know, other beekeepers in the area that are treating, well, they're going to manage their varroa a lot better than somebody, a non-treater. And in time, that non-treater, you know, it's going to get loaded with varroa and the pathogenics from that. And it's a year after year, it's going to go down and down. On a personal note, I treat every autumn, but the year before last, I had bees up on the heather and they were really strong. And I went to give them their final disease inspection before I bring them back from the heather and just feed them for the winter. And I think 4 or 5 of them had gone down with varroa really badly in the space of 10 days. And I mean, they'd gone from covering up in filling supers with heather honey down to like 3 frames. And it can really strike very quickly. And if it can do that in the winter, in the summer, you know, with nice temperatures and plenty of bees, what would it do? You know, you can imagine what it would do in the winter when the queen's just starting to lay, you know, and the varroa gets going. Because a good thing that has happened, though, in recent years is we have had a break in the brood. It's not brilliant, but we have had the queen seem to have had a break in the brood cycle. So that means that the varroa haven't got anything to feed on. So it does slow them up. And regarding the culling of drones, that is, if you know, if you're not wanting to treat with chemicals and such forth, I mean, culling of drone brood is a good thing because, you know, the varroa mites do prefer the drone brood. But I would say non-treated in the long term, you're going to probably struggle. That's just my own personal view, and obviously the view of the bee unit is to treat. Are there any questions?
I've heard that there's...
there's a question here. If your queen is a drone layer, how could treating with varroa treatment help it to survive? Well, it's not going to, unfortunately, because I mean the queen is, you know, the life of the hive, and if she's not functioning correctly, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, normally later in the season that could be corrected with a queen cell from another hive, and that would sort it out if there were enough bees there. But at this time of year, it's, and the way the season's been, there's no saving it.
Okay, there's one more question in the chat box. As you spotted the first one, Shane. So
okay.
So the second one.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, that's fine.
We live at 1,200 feet and was wondering if I should be looking to source my first nuke from someone that is of similar altitude. Having listened to discussions over installation and temperature versus moisture in the WBC, which is double skin, better choice than a national. Okay. Whereabouts do you live? We don't know where this person's living or who's the message off, do we?
Yeah, it's Rich.
Is
I don't know if Rich wants to say anything or you'd rather not, but 1,200 feet, I'm just trying to think where that might be.
What? I was just wondering what area that's all.
Just in the hills, just above Raider.
Above Raider.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, there's been some over the years, some very successful beekeepers up there.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, of course, it's your own choice, but the bees from probably around your own area or similar altitude would probably be better suited to you to start with.
Brilliant, thanks.
And regarding the...
So before you, would you, I know it's difficult, if Rich would like to buy a colony from someone nearby, I guess I mean, you know where everybody is really, don't you, I suppose? But I don't know if you're allowed to, you obviously can't, for GDPR reasons, just say where people are. But I don't know.
No, but I know somebody that's on the chat that bees would be suitable.
Right.
That I inspected. If this if Rich is looking for bees, there's somebody in Newbridge with some bees for sale, so I don't know whether they're interested now. It's just I've been to inspect them and I know they're healthy and they'd be suitable for that sort of climate. But there used to be a bee farmer in Raider and used to keep bees all around Raider in the hills, and she was very, very successful, and she kept buckfast. So, you know, but the seasons and the, have changed, so wait and see, isn't it? But good luck with it. And regarding regarding the hive, well, it's your own personal choice, I would say, whichever you wish to keep them in.
I would say, personally, I would say a polystyrene hive will have better insulation. I use both polys and wooden, and the poly hives for me.
I'm going to have to leave you a minute. But
yeah, I think we've almost finished, actually, Shane.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to go outside because. All right. Okay, well, if you're still on when I come back.
No problem. So, yeah, Rich, as Shane was saying, it's up to you, really. But I think that poly hives are actually very good for insulation. But if you speak to David, he will say that they're actually quite difficult to clean thoroughly. And I see Lynn wants to. Lynn, you want to say something?
Yeah, yes, I do. I've always used WBCs, always. Started in 1983. And I've always found them good. I think the double wall thing, the insulation's quite good. I use a piece of polystyrene usually on the top and very cold down the sides. It doesn't seem to be make condensation. But if you need to move them anywhere, it's an absolute nightmare.
On that note, there's a quite elderly beekeeper, very successful beekeeper who lives close to Newbridge. Gwen probably knows what I'm talking about. Who has always kept WBCs and has been very good at it.
Yeah, always.
The only thing with WBCs is if they are kind of a lot more work to inspect, they're a lot more expensive to buy. I'd go with Chris. I'd have a polystyrene hive every time.
Yeah, but yeah, Pete, I agree with Pete. Shane, I was just saying, obviously, there's a very successful elderly gentleman who's kept bees in WBCs all his beekeeping life very successfully and lives near Newbridge. And I don't know how high up he is, but I guess he's relatively high. I don't know. But anyway, we've come to the end of the questions. There's Gwen Middleton is with us, as I said earlier. Gwen is the lady that Shane was talking about and has hives for sale, 5 of them, I think. I think you sold 1, didn't you, Gwen?
Yes, so we've got 4 now.
Oh, 4. Oh,
yep.
Sorry, yeah, Chris, there is another question.
Is there? Oh, yes, there is.
Or have you answered it regarding the Happy Guard?
Yeah, that just came up. Sorry, I missed that, Claire. Sorry, Gwen, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Personally, I only treat in the autumn. I don't treat any other time with you unless there's a problem, so that would be fine.
Yep.
Unless you're seeing large volumes of varroa, then obviously if it's in the middle of the season, it's a bit more difficult and you've only really got the max strips then to use when there's a honey crop on. But yeah, that should be fine. Do you agree, Peter and Chris? Or
can you vaporise when there's honey crop going?
I don't like vaporising. I've lost colonies use vaporising, so I've stopped doing it.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So, yeah.
That's mine. You know, I don't know what I'm. You know, and I worry about trickling oxalic acid too. You know, if you remember, we lost all.
Yeah, that's really hard on them.
I did trickling once my first season, and I didn't lose any colonies, but I lost a lot of bees, and I didn't fancy doing it again.
Yeah.
I've used ApiGuard since, and it's been fine, and I'm not seeing varroa on my inspection boards at the moment. I'll keep an eye on it, but I didn't feel inclined to do anything else at the moment because they seem well. So.
I mean, if you have got supers on, you can always sprinkle icing sugar over them. and that'll have an effect on the varroa. That'll cause them to drop.
Oh, it's interesting.
I don't know. What do you think about that, Shane?
Well, the B unit don't recommend it, and I've never done it, so I can't comment. But if you've got experience of it, that's fine.
I've never done this either. I mean, it's just something that came to the top of my head. If you didn't want to,
I don't think it's very successful. You know, because that would be an easy fix for us, but it didn't really work when the B unit did trials on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that's all the questions. Hillary's just said she's going to put her hens to bed, so she's gone. Well, that's okay. Gwen, did you want to just say something about your colonies, or?
Yes, if that's okay. We've got 4 colonies for sale. They're all in polystyrene hives. The couple we're keeping are actually in WBCs, which we've grown to like. But yeah, so they're all healthy colonies. One is a single brood, the others are brood and a halves. I think if anybody wants any details, you know, get in touch with me, or I can send information. I've been sort of taking photographs, or if anybody wants to come and have a look, that's fine. You know, we're in Newbridge. I know that we are at around 500 feet here, if that's any help to the gentleman who's looking for bees at 1,200 feet. And we did actually, one of the colonies was small going into the winter, and it's come through really successfully in the poly hive. We just gave it a little bit of syrup there a couple of weeks ago to give it a bit of encouragement, because there was some undrawn frames in there to help them sort of, expand.
Do you treat for varroa, Gwen?
Yes, we do. We gave them all Max late last summer, sort of at the very end of August. So, but we don't do the oxalic. No, that's the Max is what they have, and it seems to work. You know, just check them and try and keep on top of it, like everybody. But yes, I mean, I don't know if I can give my email address or telephone number, so that if anybody would like to, you know, get in touch about them.
If you can stick it on the chat box, but we'll put all your details on the website, Gwen, if you've still got the
yeah,
after tonight.
That would be great. Yeah, and yeah. And yeah, as Shane said, he did come and inspect them all a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, they've had a clean bill of health from Shane. So
that sounds pretty good to me.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gwen. So
yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. That's great.
Can I just say, Chris?
Yes.
If there are any new beekeepers that would like me to come and have a look at their bees and give them a little bit of advice, if they could get in touch with me directly, that would be good. Because the priorities have changed for our working pattern. It used to be that we still focus where there's disease within 3 and then 5K, but we're trying to update bee base, because unfortunately a lot of people haven't been looked at for a long time, and we're sort of talking 10 years, and we're trying to, this year going to concentrate on getting through them. But in the latter half of last year, there was quite a major outbreak of EFB around the Newtown area. So I do spend a lot of time up there, but that's not to say I've forgotten about South Powys. So if there are any concerns, get in touch with me, because you're unlikely, unless you're a new beekeeper or haven't been inspected for a long time, you're probably not going to hear from me this year.
I'm pretty sure your details go on the newsletter. So if anybody needs to get hold of Shane, have a look at our newsletter, and hopefully you'll get our newsletter, particularly the new beekeepers. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to get it. Before we go, I I mean, I'll probably arrange another one for 2 weeks' time if everybody's okay with this. I have recorded this. It is being recorded. I don't know how I'm going to use that. I may go back and pick up a few things from it. As I say, I'm trying to make up a frequently asked questions, but I'll probably use my PowerPoint and put that on the website somewhere for people to look at as a resource and add to it as the weeks go by. Martin, you sent me an email that I haven't had a chance to read because it's about 20 minutes before we started. Did you want to ask that now, or do you want me to look at that and reply to you later?
No, that's fine. I think I figured you may not have seen it, and we covered some of the questions there. I suppose the only other one was particularly relevant to the weather at the moment, which is, what's more important? Is it the overnight low in terms of temperature? Is it the overnight low or the forecast high? In particular with regard to getting the bees to draw out some new foundation.
I don't think the low is a worry. It's the warm weather and the nectar coming in. If there's a nectar flow, they won't produce comb unless there's a flow of nectar.
And I think it's still too cold at night to put syrup on.
Well, yeah, that I was thinking, if I want them to draw out, I'll give them syrup. But I was worried that it was just too cold at night for that.
Unless it's very heavily insulated over the top.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody okay? That's it? No more questions? Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Hope you
I
enjoyed
want
it.
to say thank you, Chris, for coming up with the idea. It's been really helpful, really useful. I appreciate everybody's contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, everybody. Shane, Peter,
Thank you.
everybody else.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.